Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Where we have, yet again, a very grim sense of Cassandra-like powers of prophecy. I told you the Russians were all over social media, encouraging Islamophobia and facilitating far-right ideas, and most of you believe me, but not enough people to actually sit up and do something about it. You'll remember last month, a journalist called Mike Hine joined us and talked us through the actions and activities of the so-called Russian bots, and still it seemed a little bit far-fetched, unless you're neck deep in this sort of stuff, as I, more through, I think, accident than choice as I've been over the last few years. Unless you're neck deep in it, it all seemed a little bit out there, didn't it? What? There are warehouses in Russia where people are just pretending to be racist Americans in the hope of making British people vote to punch themselves in the face. Well, quod erat demonstrandum, and it's the closest I've ever been to feeling like a conspiracy theorist. You may remember some years ago we met a chap on this programme called Bill Browder. It's probably fair to say public enemy number one as far as Vladimir Putin is concerned. Last month he put Bill on the Interpol Most Wanted list, and it was an intervention from Senator John McCain that got him taken off, because what Browder does is campaign tirelessly for so-called Magnitsky sanctions. These are in memory of his lawyer who was murdered in a Russian jail after just about $230 million worth of tax that had been paid by Browder's companies was withdrawn by corrupt officials. And the corrupt officials then covered their tracks by killing the lawyer who was investigating it. It's pretty straightforward.
You have likely heard the phrase the Magnitsky Act before. That is the act that targets top Russian oligarchs and officials, Putin's closest aides, denying them access to Western visas and investment opportunities. It is the act that the Russian government wants repealed, and it is what the Russians who met with the Trump campaign wanted to talk about. Bill Browder, who had once been the largest foreign investor in Russia, is the driving force behind that law. Now the Russians have fought back. Earlier this week, Browder found a ban from the United States because Russia had put out an Interpol arrest warrant on him. Interpol has now blocked that warrant, and Mr. Browder is again free to travel. He joins me today from London. Welcome, Bill.
Good to see you.
First, explain the timing of this decision. Why this week?
Well, so last week was a very important week in that Canada passed the Canadian version of the Magnitsky Act to impose visa sanctions and asset freezes on the people who killed my lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, and the people who do similar abuses in Russia and around the world. And Putin went crazy over this. And when I say he went crazy, we actually got a chance to see a video of him giving a speech in which he spent about 5 minutes talking about how angry he was with me. And roughly on the same day as that was all happening, Putin added me to the Interpol arrest warrant system, and on that same day, my U.S. visa was blocked. Thankfully, the U.S. quickly, Senator John McCain and Senator Benjamin Cardin quickly intervened in the U.S., and a few hours later, Department of Homeland Security issued me a new visa, and thankfully, Interpol has also blocked Russia's arrest warrant, and so I'm back to normal. But it's pretty dramatic, and it's pretty clear that Putin is not a happy man about me today.
Explain why Canada's passing the Magnitsky Act is so important, because the U.S. has this law, but the fear, I think, that the Russians have is that it will spread throughout the Western world, correct?
So what the Magnitsky Act does is it freezes assets and bans visas of human rights abusers in Russia and elsewhere. Putin doesn't like this because he's a very rich man. He's got, in my estimation, $200 billion of net worth. He's probably the richest man in the world, and he's afraid that that money will be frozen. And so he initially lashed out at the American Magnitsky Act, But what's more concerning for him is that as the Magnitsky Act gets replicated in other countries, there'll be no place for him to hide, and his money won't be safe. And Putin is particularly mad about Canada because Canada is seen as a totally neutral, honest broker, moral leader type of country. You know, people can say, well, America is a big superpower, and other countries may not want to follow a superpower, but nobody has any bad feelings. There's no such thing as anti-Canadianism. And so as a result of that, I believe, and I think Putin believes, that there will be now a whole domino effect of other countries passing the Magnitsky Act.
And to remind people, this was the issue that was being brought up by the Russian lawyer and the former intelligence operative from Russia when they met with Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, Paul Manafort, when they met with the Trump campaign, correct?
Exactly. So Putin has been just really upset about this. It was his #1 foreign policy priority to get rid of the Magnitsky Act. He was through various proxies and intermediaries. They came to the United States and other countries, but they came to the United States to try to make sure that this thing wasn't going to get implemented, maybe would get repealed. And as one of those intermediaries went in, it was this woman, Natalia Veselnitskaya, this Russian lawyer, and then this Russian spy, Rinat Akhmetshin. And those were the two people on June 9th, 2016, right after Trump was nominated, the Republican nominee. They went to Trump Tower, and they met with Jared Kushner, Donald Trump Jr., and Paul Manafort. And they went in with one very specific ask, which was to repeal the Magnitsky Act. And there's no question that that's what they were asking for, because there's actually now documentary evidence of that. The only question that everybody has is what was going to be offered in return.
And to understand the Russian allegation, it is that you were complicit in the murder of your lawyer, who died in a Russian prison when you were not even in Russia. So how did you, what is the charge? How could that have happened?
I mean, it's about the craziest thing I've ever seen. So they're saying that, that I murdered Sergei Magnitsky from London somehow, and they said I did so in conjunction with an unidentified MI6 agent, MI6 being the Secret Service of Britain. And they somehow believe that I was able to pull strings in all of the Russian justice system to basically have him killed in a Russian prison. And what makes it even more absurd is that I then spent the next 8 years fighting for justice and passing sanctions against Russia to get justice for Sergei Magnitsky. I mean, it's the most crazy cockamamie allegation that could ever be made. And in a certain sense, what it shows to me is that we've really gotten under Vladimir Putin's skin, that he's kind of lost it. He's been mad for a long time, and they're just now doing crazy stuff, and this is the craziest of all the crazy stuff they've done.
Do you want to know something really spooky? Seriously, shiver down your spine stuff if you have even the vaguest investment in this radio program. When the story started breaking about Donald Trump Jr. meeting with a woman claiming to be a relative of Vladimir Putin, a Russian lawyer offering access to the Trump campaign to Vladimir Putin, someone, not me, it would never cross my mind to do this. Turned out that same woman had been tweeting criticism of this program, this radio program. I wouldn't say scared is the word to describe the response you have to that, but wondering, crikey, if they care about this, one of the tiny little outlets in world media that's possibly a little bit ahead of the curve on just how widespread the Russian stuff is, and not close to being put on the Interpol wanted list like Bill Browder is. If you follow me on Twitter, by the way, at Mr. James OB, I've done a big interview with Bill that you can have a listen to, or you can listen to the one we did on LBC some years ago at lbc.co.uk. The story is unbelievable. It's all there in his book, Red Notice. And while this is more about financial corruption, it speaks of the Kremlin's necessity, the Kremlin's need to destabilize the West. So, look, I'm just going to run you through my conspiracy theory, all right? I don't think it's homegrown. I'm sure I've cobbled together other people's thoughts and ideas, but the basis of it is pretty clear. The financial side of Putin's Kremlin is essentially an act of industrial scale self-enrichment. He jailed the richest man in Russia, put him on trial in a cage, not long after becoming president. And at this point, all the other oligarchs in the country who had enriched themselves by essentially nicking the formerly publicly owned utilities or gas companies, oil companies, you know some of their names, they were so spooked by seeing the most successful kleptocrat of all in a jail in Russia, or rather in a cage in a Russian courtroom, that they went to Putin and did deals on huge scales, that all of the money that they were siphoning out of the country would go to Vladimir Putin. He'd get a 50% stake in everything. So that's the backdrop to it. And what he is most terrified of is discovery by the Russian people, because his crony in Ukraine, you'll remember, was chased out of town when it had emerged just how rich he had become. The fellow with the golden pirate ship and the secret bank accounts. That is the backdrop to the coup in Ukraine, although because there are so many people now in the West who, I think, I'm still charitable enough to say, unwittingly doing the work of the Kremlin because they think they've got special insights into how the world works, a bit like 9/11 truthers. Or you've got people whose bigotries and prejudices run so deep that they would rather have their Islamophobia indulged than have their national security protected. That's the only way you can explain people looking at this tweet of the woman on Westminster Bridge and not calling foul immediately.
For months now, we've gazed at the US as it deals with apparent Russian interference in its political affairs. Well, as we tend to do what the Americans do, but with a lag, it was only a matter of time before concern about Russian meddling would come here. And come here it really now has. The Sun and the Times are both reporting tomorrow that the head of the National Cyber Security Centre says British energy companies have already been hacked, a clear threat to clean running of our infrastructure. That's one kind of problem. And then last night, the Prime Minister talked of a different one. She used a rather interesting phrase in condemning the Russians and fake news. The country, she said, is attempting to sow discord in the West and undermine our institutions. In short, Russia has no agenda, but is just trying to cause trouble. It's a rebel country without a cause. Now, you might say, why worry about Russian election lies? We can do plenty of that for ourselves. But we are divided enough at the moment without Russia stirring things up. So how worried should we be? Here's our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban.
Would it get some win for the Sabre? And it could get those voters. And it could get the voters.
I own nothing in Russia.
It could be Frankie.
From America to France or even Catalonia, the accusations have been emphatic that Russia has used information warfare to disrupt Western democracies, sow division and reap political rewards.
By their own criteria, inside the machine, as it were, which is doing this, it's being seen as a major success. And of course, it's important for these particular agencies, whether within the military, within the security apparatus, to be successful, to get more funding. There's a good deal of competition among the agencies in this business. So I think from a Russian point of view, from the professionals doing it, it's been a success.
But how does Britain fit into this? This week, it emerged that messages like this one on Twitter had come from a bot or automated account. It was linked to Russia and intended to divide Britons and stoke prejudice against Muslims.
Russia has perfected the art of driving wedges into the existing crux of political systems of their adversaries. And they perfected this art already in the 1960s and 70s. In the Cold War, we used to call these operations active measures. Today, of course, social media are a prime amplification tool of active measures.
Theresa May's tough talk on Russia yesterday echoed that of her intelligence bosses earlier this year, when the chief of MI6, speaking at the service's Vauxhall Cross HQ, made this accusation.
The connectivity that is at the heart of globalization can be exploited by states with hostile intent to further their aims deniably. They do this through means as varied as cyber attacks, propaganda, or subversion of democratic process.
So he's so terrified of being found out that he has to undermine the West. He has to destabilize the West. The values of freedom and democracy and transparency, which we practice in a far from perfect fashion, but compared to the Kremlin, we're practically utopian in our outlook, even, I would argue, more so than America, by dint of not having a CIA. But he needs to keep a lid on all of this stuff, because otherwise his own people will do to him what they did to the Ukrainian leader. They'll chuck him out. And he won't be able to get all his hands on the money, because the only circumstances in which he can get his hands on the money is if he still has power. If he loses power, then all the bank accounts where his money's been kept in the names of other people. I think his daughter turned up in the south of France with $1 billion in the bank not long ago. It's all there if you can be bothered to look for it. So how to distract attention from what's going on at home, sow discord and instability abroad. Okay, how do you sow discord and instability abroad? Well, look at the supranational institutions that safeguard security and stability, most obviously the United Nations, which is kind of hard to infiltrate, followed by the European Union and the other great United States in this world, in the Western world, the United States of America. How can you sow discord in the European Union and the United States of America? Well, you could hopefully fracture the European Union, maybe by encouraging one of the main member states to leave. It's a very, very big ask, but if you've got useful idiots running around in Britain telling racist lies, then all you really need to do is weaponize social media to empower and embolden them. Mission accomplished. And similarly in America, there's no real way you're ever going to get Donald Trump into the White House, is there? Is there really that much racism and bigotry and hatred washing around that country that people would vote for a 4 times bankrupt self-confessed sex offender while apparently proclaiming patriotism? Yeah? Well, they did.
Now, having been holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for over 5 years, you'd think the last place WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange would want to go is to yet another embassy. But it's emerged that WikiLeaks lobbied the Trump campaign to get them to publicly endorse Julian Assange as a candidate to be Australia's next ambassador in Washington, D.C. The messages were released to a US congressional committee which is investigating alleged Russian meddling in the US presidential election. Here's our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson.
So another wiki storm is breaking over the White House. Leaked evidence now apparently showing that WikiLeaks attempted to influence the US election campaign, and the president's son not only listened, responded, but acted upon it. It's the height of the presidential campaign. Donald J. Trump universally expected to lose. The record now shows his son, DJT Jr., was willing to grab any lifeline, including WikiLeaks. And Julian Assange's Hackers Clearinghouse sent Trump Jr. information about an anti-Trump site about to launch. Trump Jr. responded.
Off the record, I don't know who that is, but I'll ask around. Thanks.
Okay, but what's the big deal? Well, it's this.
Some have suggested on the left that all this bad stuff about Hillary, nothing bad about Trump, that your campaign is in cahoots with WikiLeaks.
Nothing could be further from the truth.
Well, today Trump Jr. has been on damage limitation, tweeting screenshots of his involvement with WikiLeaks' apparent attempt to smear the Clinton campaign.
Here is the entire chain of messages with WikiLeaks, with my whopping 3 responses. Which one of the congressional committees has chosen to selectively leak? How ironic.
But the emails also show WikiLeaks attempting to influence Trump campaign tactics, advising, via his son, that Trump should refuse to accept the result if he lost to Clinton. The following message from WikiLeaks to Donald Trump Jr. on Election Day itself, November the 8th, 2016.
Hi Don, if your father loses, we think it much more interesting if he does not concede and spends time challenging the media and other types of rigging that occurred, as he has implied that he might do.
That from WikiLeaks at 6:35 p.m. on polling day, when the idea that Clinton would win was still the prevailing wisdom. And then, well, after that it just gets plain weird. With Trump duly elected, WikiLeaks sought to have its boss Julian Assange appointed as Australia's ambassador to Washington. Yes, really. On December the 16th, WikiLeaks wrote to Trump Jr., now son of the president-elect.
In relation to Mr. Assange, Obama-Clinton placed pressure on Sweden, UK and Australia, his home country, to illicitly go after Mr. Assange. It would be real easy and helpful for your dad to suggest that Australia appoint Assange ambassador to DC.
WikiLeaks even suggested the right language to sell Assange as the Aussie Ambo.
That's a real smart, tough guy and the most famous Australian you have, or something similar. They won't do it, but it will send the right signals to Australia, UK and Sweden to start following the law and stop bending it to ingratiate themselves with the Clintons.
Good try, but it met with no response. All this with WikiLeaks under global scrutiny for allegedly leaking information useful to both the Kremlin and Trump campaign because it damaged the Clinton camp.
The Queen.
The British are in no position perhaps to lecture anyone on propaganda, but that didn't stop Theresa May last night, saying the Russians are meddling.
This has included meddling in elections and hacking the Danish Ministry of Defence and the Bundestag, among many others.
Today, Russia's foreign ministry had the following diplomatic advice for the British Prime Minister. "We know what you're doing," they tweeted, adding, "Dear Theresa, we hope one day you'll try Crimean red wine." Russia's defence ministry have also been putting in a shift today, releasing these images as proof, they said, of America's collusion with the Islamic State, except they later turned out to be doctored images of a video game. 24 hours of absurdity, from which probably the most significant thing is Theresa May telling Vladimir Putin, whatever Donald Trump may say, Britain does believe you're destabilising foreign elections, and we're not afraid to distance ourselves from the White House in telling you.
Now we're joined from the Commons by the Conservative MP Damien Collins. He chairs the Commons Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee, which is investigating allegations of Russian meddling. Damien Collins, do you have any evidence for how dangerous this might be?
Well, what I've done is I've written to Mark Zuckerberg and also to the chief executive of Twitter saying I want to see the information they have within their company that could link fake news and bot accounts and fake accounts to Russian-backed activity in the UK around the Brexit referendum and around our election too. The US Senate Intelligence Committee has managed to get that information out of those two companies with regards to the US presidential election. I think we have a right to know what was going on here. Some evidence has already emerged that shows that known Russian accounts were active in UK politics around that time. That's as a consequence of evidence that's been discovered in America. But I want to see what was going on here, and I think those companies owe it to us to produce that information for a parliamentary committee which has requested it.
Well, you said en passant that, in fact, the referendum would be one of those areas you'd want looked at. But already there have been accusations that there was Russian meddling in the referendum. Do you have any evidence on that, or has anybody forwarded anything to you?
Well, so there have been investigations so far which have demonstrated, press investigations, which have traced known Russian accounts to activity, messaging, tweeting and the like, around the period of the referendum. It's only a small number of accounts at the moment, but we seem to be discovering more and more every day. And this is because of painstaking work people are doing, analysing the list of 2,700 accounts that Twitter released to the American Senate and going through them to see whether those accounts were active in the UK as well. And some of them have been. So some of that evidence is starting to emerge, but it's on the back of the investigation that's been done in America. But this is evidence that both Twitter and Facebook will have. This is data from within their company. They have the power to go and proactively search for it now, and that's what I've asked them to do in relation to the UK. So we have a much bigger data set, so we can truly analyse what was going on and how it was being done.
What do you say to those people who say this is all paranoid nonsense?
Well, look at the evidence that's emerging. It's clear there was activity. Maybe at the beginning of the year, people would have agreed with that question and said, well, where is your evidence? But we can see it emerging now. And that's only from looking at a relatively small bit of activity from known Russian organisations who are involved in fake news. I think there is a strategy they're deploying in different countries, in America, in France, and we're starting to see it in the UK as well, where this is a tool and a weapon that they're using to destabilise other countries.
But given the way that the social network tends to work, which is that people tend to follow people they agree with, do you really think this has affected any votes?
Well, you're absolutely right to say that what social media acts as is a bit of a echo chamber, so that what people see and consume is largely relates to people they interact with. The sites try and guess what you like and give you more of it. But what these campaigns have been very successful in doing, through micro-targeting different users, is to bombard them with fake news and hyper-partisan messaging, so that the news they see and consume through these social media sites is massively biased, or indeed some of it fake. And I think what we have to do is understand that's what's being done, challenge the social media companies on how they can act against it, and give more tools to educate users so that they're more challenging in content that they see.
Damien Collins, thank you very much indeed.
How? Wouldn't have happened without Syria. And who's the biggest player in Syria? Vladimir Putin. What has his policy and his intervention in that country absolutely guaranteed? A huge exodus of humans from that part of the world to this part of the world. What would earlier proper Western intervention by British or American authorities have done, it could have contained the problem. The legacy of Iraq, of course, was that there was no appetite for an involvement in a Middle Eastern conflict among the British and American public. The Americans could probably have been railroaded into it, but Obama was, perhaps understandably, for my money wrongly, Obama was wary of getting involved in another foreign Middle Eastern war. So Vladimir Putin presides over one of the largest exoduses of human misery in the history of humanity. I think over 30,000 people have died in the Mediterranean, or died drowned while trying to make it to the West from the East. If you are buying into that propaganda about refugees being bogus or acting in bad faith or being economic migrants, just tell me what it would take for you to take those odds. 33,000 people dead. You're going to take those odds, are you? How desperate would your life have to be? You're going to do that for a smartphone and a job seeker's allowance and a council flat in Balham, are you? You're going to risk that? 33,000 dead? So the wave of refugees comes, and what was the weirdest thing about the far-right activity, or what appeared to be far-right activity, and pro-Brexit weirdness on social media in the run-up to the referendum? What was the weirdest thing about it? You'll remember, we actually had vox pop after vox pop after vox pop, people saying they were going to vote to leave the European Union because they didn't want any Muslims coming here. This after Angela Merkel invited 1 million refugees, 33,000 drowned, remember, would you take those odds? Took 1 million refugees into Germany, and lying racists in this country started pretending that that meant they could come here immediately, that they'd somehow be able to waltz over the borders into this country. Completely untrue. Some people don't come with me when I use the phrase racist liars to describe these people, and maybe I'm wrong. They're definitely racists. They might just be stupid. They might deliberately not be looking into the facts because they prefer their neat little demagogic call to arms. I'm not sure. I'll never know. It's so easy to find out the circumstances in which someone taken into Germany as a refugee would ever be able to leave Germany as a German citizen. The minimum amount of time it would take is 7 years. So then you have the idea, yes, someone's going to sit in Germany for 7 years peacefully, waiting for the opportunity to come to Britain as a German citizen and do us harm. Again, you could perhaps buy into that. But I don't, because I've got a brain and a conscience. And when I hear the Prime Minister describing how a Kremlin-backed Twitter account, of which there are tens of thousands, you'll have heard that on this programme recently, tens of thousands, you wonder how it could have happened. Well, today people will be, and they do it for Trump as well, calling for, start looking at Hillary Clinton, start investigating uranium, start investigating this, start investigating that. Where do you think all that comes from? Comes from Russia. And Donald Trump Jr. has published in the course of the last 24 hours secret exchanges he had with WikiLeaks. He's clearly not the sharpest knife in the drawer, Trump Jr., and presumably, I don't know, maybe someone's told him that if you've put it on Twitter, you can't be sued for it. But there is evidence of exchanges between him and WikiLeaks, which effectively highlights how WikiLeaks conspired with Donald Trump's son to try to influence the result of the American election. I'll remind you what Al Gore did when he was approached by somebody who'd got access to George W. Bush's preparations for a televised debate. It's hardly what you'd call a smoking gun, but the minute that Al Gore's aide opened that envelope, he was on the phone to the FBI, and he removed himself from the entire equation for the duration. Donald Trump Jr. gets approaches from Russian lawyers offering access to Putin, gets approaches from WikiLeaks, probably Julian Assange in person, possibly, offering help and advice on how they should leak information and manipulate it. Who do they call? Nobody. And that's why we are where we are. That's why it is unbelievably late in the game for Theresa May to make this intervention. And while I'm glad that she has, it's not going to change anything. It's not going to change anything. The Russians influenced Brexit. People don't care. People would rather have their Islamophobia indulged and inflamed by the kind of tweets that we see on a regular basis than have their national security enshrined and insured. 0345 6060 973. And the game plan now of the Russian bots, anybody making these claims, anybody making these points out, anybody making these arguments, there's three things you do. First of all, you question their patriotism, then you question their mental health, and then you question their honesty. So have a look at Twitter, see if that's happening yet. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call if you can tell me how you think Kremlin intervention via social media has been allowed to inflame Islamophobia in this country to such a degree that people voted to leave the European Union because they were frightened of Muslims. Wow. Or give me a buzz and pull me to shreds, because that is, I appreciate, a pretty conspiratorial sounding sequence of events. Somewhat inconveniently, though, for people who don't like the sound of it, every single level of it is backed up with evidence. 0345 6060 973. Give us a buzz. But it won't work. It doesn't matter that Theresa May has come out and condemned Russia, starting with the annexation of Crimea, which happened at the end of February in 2014, just after Yanukovych had been thrown out in the Ukraine. It all fits, but this won't matter, because imagine it was you. Imagine you'd retweeted that picture of the woman on Westminster Bridge with the line from a Kremlin-sponsored Twitter account saying that she was uncaring about all the death and carnage around her. There's no earthly way, if you were minded to tweet that you're going to be able to put the brakes upon your bigotry. To see that photograph, to imagine anybody capable of walking past carnage and somehow being utterly untouched by it, utterly unaffected, it means you're desperate to believe the worst of people. And if you're desperate to believe the worst of people, you're not going to believe the truth even when it comes from a British Prime Minister. That's how crazy things are. And Theresa May speaks for the first time about the proud Texan and American patriot who was tweeting anti-British and anti-Muslim propaganda from Russia. But the people who want to follow and swallow that anti-British, anti-Muslim propaganda are not going to have their minds changed by the knowledge that it's all come from the Kremlin. In fact, they're probably going to actually choose to believe the Kremlin more than they believe their own Prime Minister. And who does that remind you of? Who said last week that you can't trust the CIA or the FBI or any of the American intelligence agencies, but you can believe Vladimir Putin? Who said that last week? Come on, class. Yeah, Donald Trump. Tell me that's not a jigsaw that's just slotted very neatly into place. Anton is in Swindon. Anton, what would you like to say?
Yeah, just wanted to share my conspiracy theories about all this. So what's going on? I agree. So first of all, I'm Russian myself. Yeah, so I'm kind of I watch closely what's going on in Russia and the relation between Putin and the Western world. But what is happening right now? As you mentioned, there is a Magnitsky law, and there is a lot of personal pressure on Putin and on his personal environment, friends and family. So the way how Putin acts towards the Western world, I take it rather as a personal revenge. Yeah, so he actually wants to kind of relieve pressure from him personally, and for that he's using all the government and all the state tools he has in his hands.
That fits, certainly fits with my understanding. Although I suspect you're being by dint of being Russian, you've probably studied things a lot more closely than I have. But it's often the case, isn't it, that things are a lot simpler than you think they might be. This is a man, as I understand it, desperately trying to protect his own corrupt position by throwing distraction and disruption and instability wherever he can, most chiefly among the traditional enemies of Russia.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to say that, I think it's wrong to associate Russia and, Putin's actions. So it's not Putin...
you're so right. Putin is not Russia and Russia is not Putin, but it sometimes looks that way to us in the West.
Well, yeah, so something else I wanted to say. Yeah, so I think it's pretty much it, Yeah. So
what about the bots then, Anton? Were you across this? Were you aware of the social media influence? Because again, it's the only thing that really makes sense of some of the stuff that was going on social media. The obvious lies, but they appealed to a certain strand of hatred, and that guaranteed that they'd be halfway around the world before the truth had got his boots on.
Well, absolutely. What I wanted to say is, there is no way we can take Putin's words seriously. There is no way we can trust him, because there were already so many evidences that he actually declines. He rejects everything, any blames at all. Yeah. So, for example, Crimea invasion. Yes. So the first words is it's not us. Yeah. There is a lot of doping scandal between the Olympic Games and...
God, you're right, yeah. Everything is corrupt, whether it's athletics or whether it's the annexation of a sovereign territory like Crimea.
Yeah, everything corrupt, but it's also everything is rejected. Yeah, so he doesn't accept any evidences at all.
Shot down an airline, but he didn't.
No. Sorry, say again?
The shooting down of the Malaysian Airlines jet.
Oh, well, yeah, it's one of the examples, yeah. So,
I appreciate, this is a slightly tough question, but when you, as a Russian in Wiltshire, I think that's John le Carre's next book, as a Russian in Wiltshire, when you hear people who are British, people who've never been near Russia in their life, essentially doing his dirty work for him in a Western democracy, punting the kind of Islamophobic lines, punting the anti-refugee lines, sowing instability, sowing division. How does it strike you? Is it just that we don't know how lucky we are to have the freedoms that we've got? Or I'd be fascinated to know how a Russian responds to seeing British people do the work of Vladimir Putin in social media and even mainstream media.
Well, in many sense, I think it's exaggerated. So I think it's not as bad as actually Western media is trying to present it. I don't believe Putin has a huge influence on all the government processes ongoing in the UK or
not the government processes. No, but I'm thinking more about the ordinary people, like people who retweeted this picture, people whose Islamophobia is so entrenched that they will essentially. And the thing is that the Russians, not the Russians, these particular Russians, they knew it would work. That's what's so fascinating. That's like psyops.
Yeah, okay, I just remember what I wanted to say.
Oh, good. That's what I was waiting for, Anton. I was just trying to keep you company until the light bulb came back on.
Yeah, so what I wanted to say, that in fact, I will not talk about the entire Western world, but
no, of course.
UK, for example, provides a lot of support to Putin, itself. A lot of properties is in London, yeah, and UK authorities, they know whom this property belongs to, yeah. There are a lot of bank accounts and the financial activities ongoing of the companies affiliated with Putin itself, yeah.
Yes.
So if Western world want to cut any relations with Putin, first of all, they have to close this bank account.
And in America they have. This is what the Magnitsky, this is why I began by talking about Sergei Magnitsky, because of course America has passed a Magnitsky Act. Canada passed it very recently, which is why Bill Browder, who's in charge of pushing for it around the world, was put on the Interpol wanted list. But in London, there's movement and we've done some things, but we haven't done nearly as much as other countries have done.
Well, that's true. The process has started, but still quite a lot of properties and financial assets associated with Western world. Actually, all the financial assets, all of the Putin's, assets, they're in Western world, yeah, because he keeps very, very little in Russia itself. So I think it's the main action which UK government and the US they have to take. They have to get rid of all the corrupted money which is inside of.
But we need the money. This is the grim subtext of what you're saying, is that our economy is. Well, who else has got £50 million to drop on a mansion, or to go shopping for old masters on Jermyn Street, or to be investing in sporting events or whatever it may be? The wash of money, the swell of money that's washed into these shores from Russia, stolen money, is so immense that arguably conservative politicians are less likely to stop that stem than any other flavour. It's 29 minutes after 10. Anton, thank you for your patience as well. The Muslim woman photographed was forced to identify, or to defend herself. She was never identified, but she spoke to the charity Mama, which supports victims of anti-Muslim hate, to say, "I'm shocked and totally dismayed at how a picture of me is being circulated on social media. What the image does not show is that I had talked to other witnesses to try and find out what was happening, to see if I could be of any help, even though enough people were at the scene tending to the victims." And even, you know, an old cynic like me, who's been in the journalism industry for a couple of decades, wondered at the time how this had happened. I mean, who would... I just thought maybe someone's gone through the contact sheets at a newspaper and found a photograph which they can use to punt a far-right perspective. How could anybody in the aftermath of a terror attack be looking for a reason to hate upon an innocent Muslim woman? But of course it was a professional. What I would love you to do, it's not going to happen, is it? But if you're the kind of person that retweets this with a comment on it saying, "Yeah, you see, chuck them all out," how does it feel to know that you've been played by the Russians? 0345 6060973. I think I know what question to ask about this. Let's have a look at what Theresa May said last night. I quote verbatim. Russia, she's speaking about, and she said, "is seeking to weaponize information, deploying its state-run media organizations to plant fake stories and photoshopped images in an attempt to sow discord in the West and undermine our institutions. Better late than never." One of the best examples provided is a series of tweets from 2016 which show how a network of Kremlin-backed accounts posted a number of anti-immigration and pro-Brexit messages around the time of the referendum and in the wake of the major terror attacks. This account in particular, the proud Texan and American patriot who sent that picture of the woman in a headscarf round the world, claiming that she'd been unmoved by the events on Westminster Bridge that day. That's been identified by Twitter in evidence to the US Congress as being backed by the Russians. So it's got very little to do with British politics directly. It's a sort of accidental association. So you have Twitter themselves giving evidence to the US Congress, which is then relayed by the British Prime Minister. But if you need evidence that Vladimir Putin's work is already done, you need only dip into social media on these sort of issues and find out how many people are choosing to believe Vladimir Putin, or are choosing rather to disbelieve Western institutions. And I still don't know why. I think one of the problems with not having that part of your brain that is dedicated to blind hatred is that and instead being cursed with a brain that's desperate to understand why other people do the things that they do. I can't quite imagine ever considering being given a freedom to hate on brown people or a freedom to be vile about Muslims more valuable than a free press or a free democracy or the rule of law. But you also have now the added problem of not knowing who's real and who's coming out of these warehouses in Russia. So how do you account for this happening? How do you account for somebody you might be sitting next to at work, or somebody you might live near, or somebody who might even be in your family, somebody whose Facebook feed you regularly gawp at? How do you account for the fact that we now have in our midst a significant number of people who would rather believe the Kremlin than the US Congress and the British Prime Minister? Now, we laugh at Donald Trump, but he said last week, "I believe Vladimir Putin," and he derided his own intelligence agencies, the CIA, the FBI, the ones we don't even know the name of. And just think about this for a minute. They're the most conclusive proof that Vladimir Putin has done all of the things he's accused of doing is the people standing up and saying that he hasn't. 0345 6060973 is the number you need. May attacks Russia over propaganda war on West. There has been no propaganda war, say the people who have been persuaded by it. I mean, it's almost perfect. Peter's in Dublin. Peter, what's going on?
Hi, sorry, yeah, from Dudley.
Dudley, not Dublin.
No, not Dublin, I'm afraid.
That's a massive... I could have told within about 3 seconds from your action. Are you sure you want to use up your phone call now? Because we're going to be talking about zoos in the third hour of the programme, and my favourite zoo in the country is in Dudley.
Well, there's not a lot to say about the Dudley Zoo, but... never mind.
Go on then, talk to me about Russian propaganda instead, Peter.
So, I honestly do believe that Russia would use Brexit as a propaganda tool to split the European Union. And the reasons why, I don't think it's exclusively because, you know, something specifically against Britain, but just the EU in general.
Yes, of course.
If you go back to 2014...
MI5 on the line. Carry on.
You go back to Euromaidan in 2014 in Kiev.
Yes.
What was happening there was obviously the previous president fled back to Russia, and the sort of progressives and liberals of the Ukraine, and specifically in the Kiev region, wanted to draw closer to the European Union.
Yanukovych was deposed, and the chatter started immediately that he'd been backed by he'd been ousted by neo-Nazis and extremists and things like that in the European Union. I remember taking calls on this programme from people saying, well, what would you do if the European Union had parked their tanks on your border? The propaganda machine was already working overtime back then, and we just didn't notice.
But the thing is as well, it's completely worked.
I know.
Now everything's very, very quiet with regard to the Ukraine. They've illegally, they've taken the Crimea. Now, you could always turn around and say, well, the Crimea was always quite unique.
I don't know what is happening to your line, but it's likely to start irritating or worrying some of the people listening when that beep keeps kicking in. They started the annexation of Crimea on the 23rd of February 2014, almost immediately after the ousting of Yanukovych, for precisely the reasons that we've discussed, to kind of distract and destabilise.
Yeah. And equally, there's a lot of money a lot of Russian money in the UK. It would work very nicely if that was outside of the remit of the EU, to check out things like with corruption, with embezzlement, and then on top of that, consider that the one thing that Russia doesn't want to have is a strong European Union for things like energy, like gas and natural gas is coming across into Europe. I mean, 60% of a lot of former Eastern Bloc countries and Central European countries of the gas that they consume is from Russia. Obviously, Britain, we have a lot of the gas from the North Sea, but it's divide and conquer, really. And anywhere that they can fracture them and take the emphasis of what they're doing in the Ukraine, in Georgia, or what they did do in Georgia, is a welcome distraction for them getting on with what they want to do.
I think, history will judge that account to be pretty much definitive, but as we're living it rather than analysing it, you must know, I'm not going to malign the people of Dudley, Peter, or indeed your social circle, but you must know people, or you must come across people who will retweet or stick on Facebook the kind of poison that we're talking about. What are they weighing up on a day like today when they're given a choice? Either believe that you've been played by Putin's regime. You're quite right, Lee Hughes, to tell me to say Putin's regime, not Russia. It's not 150 million Russians who are conspiring to destabilise the West. But they're given a choice today between either admitting that they've been played by Kremlin's regime, and they've been played because their prejudices were so pronounced and so easily manipulated, or that the only other choice they have is to disbelieve the American and British intelligence services, the British Prime Minister, the Congress, and the social media platforms upon which this stuff has actually appeared. And my fear, in fact, my conviction is, they'll choose the latter. They'll choose to disbelieve the British Prime Minister while preaching about their patriotism. They'll choose to disbelieve the American intelligence agencies because their hero Donald Trump has given them license to do so. And they'll choose essentially to double down on the Kremlin manipulation. That's going to happen.
Well, yeah, but I think the thing is, James, is that what you're guilty of is that you think that they put credibility on any of those institutions as being reputable. People are far more likely to take on. I see it with people that I've got on like a Facebook feed. They will literally consume utter nonsense without checking anything. There was one a couple of months ago, perhaps it was around the time of Ramadan.
Yes.
Someone had put flyers through letterboxes, and it was saying, please do not, during this holy time of Ramadan, please do not let your dogs walk through our neighbourhood, as dogs are considered as dirty creatures and are haram. Thank you for your consideration. And there was a link on the bottom of the flyer. And this I'd seen shared by quite a few people because it absolutely fed into what they were happy to kind of say, well, yeah, that must be true. You clicked on the link and it took you to a far-right Swedish website.
Yes. But they don't click on the link. I mean, this is one of the great discoveries about social media for me. Carry on.
Beg your pardon. The link wasn't there, but there was actually, if you looked on the picture, if you literally gone and typed in, the website, you'd have seen pretty quickly that that's exactly what it was. But people don't want to do their homework.
Well, but that's where I get baffled. That's why, because knowledge is power, and yet prejudice, it would seem, for a significant swathe of the population, prejudice is even more powerful. It's almost as if not examining the source of the stuff that feeds into your hatred is what keeps the hatred alive. Can I ask you a question? Because you've clearly thought about this in a way that I have as well. I'm a big believer, and we're referencing Brexit today because these accounts, just to give you an example, were found to have also tweeted stuff about Brexit, quite obviously in some of the cases. And there is, for me, a very important distinction to be drawn between because if I'd been brought up differently and I lived in a slightly different environment and maybe I'd been educated differently, and someone was telling me constantly that all Muslims are dodgy, that all Muslims are evil, that all Muslims are paedophiles, that all Muslims are this, that and the other, and I didn't know any, and I didn't have, the freedom. I didn't live in a big multicultural metropolis like London. I couldn't just go out and I work with. Do you see what I mean? If I can muster up some sympathy for some of the people who have been misled, but how do you tell the difference between them and the ones who live to hate? Obviously the ones who get paid for it, you can spot them a mile off, but the ones who follow the ones who get paid for it because they'd rather believe the hate-filled lies than believe the altogether less exciting truth. How do you tell the difference?
I think it comes down to drip feeding, to be honest. People don't start off initially hating their neighbours. They need a reason to do. Can be, an isolated incident. What, sorry? Your
beat point again. It's beginning to freak me out. Go on.
Let's beat up in him. It starts from something. It's a trickle down, isn't it? You're like, for example, I wasn't alive in the 70s, but parents and older colleagues that I know, had a very racist attitude towards immigrants.
Yes.
Growing up, it was, that's their way, that's them, that's the way that they do their business, and after a while, people don't really want to question anymore, and I don't think even, they don't want to question anymore. It doesn't suit their world.
It's complicated. It's complicated and distressing. Whereas if you can have a simple soundbite to subscribe to, even if it's complete hokum, as long as you don't put any effort into finding out whether it's complete hokum or not, it can be quite comforting, I suppose, to just believe simple lies. Simple answers to complicated questions never, ever, ever work. I think political correctness played a part in it as well. I think because successfully these kind of views and ideas had been suppressed over the years. I think we probably underestimated, although anyone who read the Daily Mail would have known that they were still there, but you weren't allowed to say stuff in public without feeling a little bit ashamed or without being looked at askance. And so as soon as there was an opportunity on social media to start saying all this stuff in public again without being looked at askance or without feeling ashamed, you're even going to get retweeted and liked. Maybe people got a little bit carried away with their bigotries and hatreds. And where's it led us? Well, it's led us to here. Muslim woman pays no mind to the terror attack, casually walks by a dying man while checking phone, hashtag pray for London, hashtag Westminster, hashtag ban Islam. You got headlines in The Sun last year saying we need less Islam. All the planets align. And when it's pointed out that you've been played by the Russians, what do? You're not going to admit it. You're going to double down and say that this is all part of the conspiracy to silence, I don't know, the patriots. This is yet more evidence. If you are on that side of the fence, this is yet more evidence of hashtag fake news. Thank you, Peter. I apologise for repositioning you in Dublin, although Dudley is almost as an attractive a city. It's 10:47.
We know there's a factory in St. Petersburg where Russian-backed internet trolls swamp social media with messages aimed at destabilising the West at the very least and changing the course of our democracies at the very most. Whether they achieve this is obviously up for debate, but the evidence is mounting that the first is really rather easy, setting different groups of society against each other very effectively through fake images and distorting the truth of events, that kind of thing. The Electoral Commission is investigating suggestions that Russia used Facebook and Twitter to interfere in the Brexit vote. The social media giants will also be called to give evidence to the Commons Select Committee, the Culture Select Committee on this over alleged Russia meddling. And what about the general election? Is it possible that Russia interfered there as well? On a scale of 1 to 10, how worried do you think Vladimir Putin is now that we've woken up to his new war game? And just how dangerous is that war game? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. Theresa May spoke yesterday about this, saying that the government would maintain its commitment to protecting Europe after Brexit, as she accused Russia of military aggression in Ukraine and meddling in elections here and elsewhere. Have a listen to what she said.
Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea was the first time since the Second World War that one sovereign nation has forcibly taken territory from another in Europe. Since then, Russia has fomented conflict in the Donbass, repeatedly violated the national airspace of several European countries, and mounted a sustained campaign of cyber espionage and disruption. This has included meddling in elections and hacking the Danish Ministry of Defence and the Bundestag, among many others. It is seeking to weaponize information, deploying its state-run media organizations to plant fake stories and photoshopped images in an attempt to sow discord in the West and undermine our institutions. So I have a very simple message for Russia. We know what you are doing, and you will not succeed, because you underestimate the resilience of our democracies, the enduring attraction of free and open societies, and the commitment of Western nations to the alliances that bind us.
That was the Prime Minister yesterday. Well, if you were listening around this time yesterday, you'll have heard my conversation with Sir Jeremy Greenstock. He joined me on the programme, and he had this answer when I asked him to what degree he felt we were being played by the Russians.
Well, this is what's going on in geopolitics at the moment. Because big wars are unthinkable and the use of nuclear weapons is unthinkable, big powers are beginning to shadow each other with other instruments in their hands, of economic espionage, of hacking, of
resources,
interference,
resource wars.
And they're getting very good at it, and the defence has got to be better. So this is quite worrying and needs some kind of international agreement that we don't destabilise each other's countries this way.
And I wonder, when you hear this, do you, just as an ordinary citizen like myself, do you feel that that you are that easily fooled on social media in particular? Do you feel you're that easily fooled by, I don't know, a Twitter handle or something you see on Facebook? Because in the last in this post-Brexit, in my experience, I've started to hear very particular terminology and very particular sentences keep getting repeated to me in conversations here and there, on air, off air, in taxis, at home, with friends. You know, you hear similar language being used that seems to have come out of nowhere. Just how easy is it to be fooled in this way and to have your nation changed in this way? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. Here to talk about this with me for a few minutes is Ben Bradshaw, former Labour Cabinet Minister, Labour MP for Exeter. How concerned are you about this, Ben Bradshaw?
I'm pretty concerned, Sheila. I've been raising this with the government and with the Prime Minister for around a year now, and finally the Prime Minister seems to have acknowledged in her speech last night that this is a problem. I think the interesting question is why it's taken her so long and what the government is going to do about it. We still don't know, for example, because she hasn't said how extensive the interference in the EU referendum or this year's general election were or may have been. But as you say, there are a number of inquiries going on, not just in this country, the Select Committee and the Electoral Commission investigations, but also, and very importantly, of course, Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into collusion, but alleged collusion between the Kremlin and the Trump campaign in the United States, which has already reached our shores.
And what would the concrete political upshot be if you, as an MP, were given information that showed that our general election, say, had been materially interfered with?
Well, I think it depends how hard that evidence is and how much of it there is. I'm not suggesting that whatever we find out, and I think we will find out, incidentally, in time, could have changed the outcome of this year's general election or the referendum. Although, don't forget, both of those votes were extremely close. But what matters here is the integrity and the security of our democracy and our electoral process. That's my main concern. And whether you were a Labour or Conservative or voted Leave or Remain, that's something that should concern you too, because I think the public need to feel they can have confidence in the security and integrity of our democracy and our electoral system in order for them to have confidence in our democracy.
A lot of the people I speak to, when I ask about the rigour of social media information, for example, say, well, you know, the newspapers in this country have been just as bad over the years in different ways, you know, shaping the message to suit a particular political bent. And there's a lot of truth in that, isn't there? That someone's always trying to play us one way or another. That's not too cynical.
Absolutely. I mean, I would make a very important distinction, though, between overt influence, you know, the boisterous campaigning character of our newspapers, campaigning this way or another, and you know, giving you a very strong line, and this sort of covert activity, which I don't think we've really appreciated the extent of. I mean, some of the evidence coming out of the States is absolutely mind-blowing in terms of the volume and the number of these fake accounts and the millions and millions of Americans who this propaganda reached. And then, of course, there's also the allegation that's being investigated by the Electoral Commission over illegal funding. So it's not just about the social media impact, but it's also about the role that dark money may have played in the referendum and may play more generally in our politics.
And the degree of scrutiny in Parliament, so that we do find out what the level of interference was or was not. What does that look like, Ben, as an MP? What transparency is there?
Well, I'm delighted that the Culture, Media and Sport Committee, which is chaired by a Conservative, have launched an investigation. I'm also delighted that the Electoral Commission finally, after several months of requests, have their investigations into this. I suspect that once the Intelligence and Security Committee is re-established, it's a bit of a scandal in my view that that committee still hasn't met since the election, and I think there are questions to be asked of the government as to why that committee hasn't been reconstituted. It has a very important role. It can quiz the heads of our intelligence services. But my worry about all of the British investigations is that our system, these inquiries, don't have the power to subpoena evidence and take evidence on oath, and their sanctions are pretty paltry.
In the way that congressional hearings can, for example.
You're absolutely right. So I think it's Robert Mueller's inquiry, which I think may have persuaded Theresa May that she couldn't carry on stonewalling about this as an issue, and came out with the speech she made last night, because the Mueller inquiry is already uncovering a fascinating nexus of people and operatives here in the UK, and that's something that he has enormous power to continue to expose.
Okay. Ben Bradshaw, good to talk to you. Thank you. Former Labour Cabinet Minister, Labour MP for Exeter. Listening to all of that was Sir Andrew Wood, Associate Fellow of the Russia and Eurasia Programme at Chatham House, former British Ambassador to Russia as well, to give you your full title. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
How long has Russia been up to this, do you think? And have we always been alive to it, or are we playing catch-up?
Well, I agreed with a great deal of what Ben Bradshaw said. I don't know if the government's been stonewalling on this. It is not a new phenomenon entirely, but it has become far more widespread and far more technologically organized. One of the things that was done in the US campaign was to target particular voters in particular states according to the sort of profiles they'd acquired by technological means.
And how do you think this changes how we engage with Russia? I mean, that was quite a stern speech from the Prime Minister, wasn't it?
Yes, I don't think it actually changes at all. We have always recognized that Russia is a threatening power to its neighbors in the first place. We have recognized that it's done its best to split up European countries from each other, and between the United States and the rest of us. I think that Mr. Bradshaw was right to talk about the importance of the Mueller inquiry, in which we played some accidental role, perhaps, in encouraging a proper investigation of what the Russians were actually doing.
Well, as I think it was James Comey said in those congressional hearings, didn't he, the former FBI head, that you often find things you weren't looking for when you go looking for particular things. So maybe that's what we will find in months and years to come. Just a final thought on weaponising information. I mean, that's always been the case in war, hasn't it? If you think of Lord Haw during the Second World War.
First of all, we're not actually at war.
No, we're not. But it's a kind of war game, though, isn't it? Information war.
So.
You don't think so?
Well, I think it's the wrong way to look at it as a context in that. What Russia is trying to do is cut itself off from the world information space, and it's an aim of Putin's policies to tell lies to his own people. It's therefore not entirely surprising he should seek to tell lies to the rest of the world as well. But what he wants to do is to keep power for himself and his rather small circle around him, and to pursue a policy which he would describe as one of a great power. That is to dominate his neighbourhood. That's essentially what he's trying to do. Personally, I don't think that's a great power. It's certainly not the action of a great nation.
Sir Andrew Wood, thank you. Good to talk to you. Associate Fellow of the Russia and Eurasia Programme at Chatham House, former British Ambassador to Russia as well. He's trying to fool us, says Theresa May. He's trying to undermine us. How easily undermined do you think we are? How easy is it to change our democracy? 0345 6060 973. Weaponising information. 84850, the number to text. You can tweet at LBC. It's 16 minutes past 1. Paul has called from Sydenham to talk about Theresa May's speech last night, and particularly her remarks aimed at Vladimir Putin and at Russia. What did you make of it, Paul?
Personally, I think we've played into the hands of the Russian rhetoric, to be honest, because obviously we're being alienated anyway through the Brexit. The Russians obviously wanted to break up the NATO. That's obvious. A couple of points I wanted to make, though. We've sat here, and I don't think that it's a good idea to sabre rattle when you haven't got your backyard sorted out first. Do you
mean Brexit?
Well, everything. To be perfectly honest with you, I mean, we're down on everything. Military-wise, we've got no capabilities whatsoever. We're dependent on other countries, right? At the same time, we've asked for Brexit, right? Personally, I think we should stay out of foreign policy anyway, because we can't afford to do anything. God forbid if we did have contention with Russia to that extent. We've got virtually no resources. The money's not there.
But we wouldn't be doing it. But in terms of military action, we wouldn't be doing anything of that nature on our own, would we? This isn't military. It's a different kind of war, in inverted commas.
It's cyber warfare. Believe it or not, we've got great technology here that we haven't really put to good use. We don't use our resources in the right way. We've become so dependent on things abroad that all the money is spent abroad. And the political games that I see Theresa May and the other guy, the new Defence Secretary, who decided to throw his words out there like Donald Trump and call Mr. Pyongyang a madman, to try and on the map for North Korea. We're only round the corner. We're not as far as the USA. I just think that's like, why would you be doing that anyway?
And what about, I'm keen to kind of tag on to this discussion where people get their information from, because if and it looks to be the case, social media in particular is being bombarded by large-scale, state-sponsored, organised information warfare, basically. How do any of us really secure the information that we are receiving and understand it and know that it is true?
Well, we've got technology, guys. Here we don't use our resources in the right way. We're dependent on people abroad to give us information. We don't spend enough money here on intelligence to actually get that information correct.
No, I'm talking about news. I'm talking about how you as an ordinary citizen, not what MI5 are doing or MI6 or GCHQ, but you and I as ordinary citizens. I mean, I know where I get my information from, and obviously as a journalist, it's a very broad sort of spectrum of information sources. You know, we have the BBC, which for all its faults is still an extraordinary organisation that is rigorous.
You can see fake news. You know fake news when you see it.
Well, not everybody does.
Not everybody does, but there's obviously people who will play into the hands. Like I said, we've played into the hands of the Russians very easily because we take what we see, and then obviously it goes out. You sit there and you broadcast it. Millions of people hear you, and then it puts the scare tactics on, and that's where things go. That's where things start going downhill because we all jump onto the bandwagon, whereas smart people take a step back. Hold on a minute. This is not really happening. I look at the markets on a daily basis. I can see what's going on there, and I can see the political games that these politicians play just to make X amount come back into the treasury. And you have to do that. You've got to put a scare tactics out there so you can demand money from the people.
What scare tactics are you talking about? You're sounding a bit like a conspiracy theorist here, Paul.
Well, it's not conspiracy theory. It's blatantly obvious that when political start doing their little dabbling and want their little saw Putin and Trump the other day shake hands and have a little word in the air, and yet just a couple of weeks before and a couple of days before, it's like they're the worst enemies ever. You can see where Trump's playing his tax plans. He knows how to get his money. You put scare out there, people will throw money at you just to get, obviously, for defences.
All right, Paul, thanks for your call. Paul in Sydenham. Jazz in Uxbridge. How big a deal do you think this is for ordinary people, you and me?
No big deal at all, really. It's like water off a duck's back. Nobody really takes much notice of this apart from the elites and the people that are trying to push all this propaganda, I'm afraid. Because I think Theresa May's had a really terrible week. Terrible month, really. So she's got to turn to something. There's got to be a bit of a distraction here. And it's just like Hillary done, you know. She lost something, she's having a bad time. Call on Putin. Yeah. He doesn't seem to retaliate in that way. But as far as text and things like that go, it has no major effect on me. I retweet RT, I retweet Sputnik, I even retweet LBC sometimes. But it doesn't mean that I'm pushing conspiracy or propaganda against Russia or all this nonsense.
Well, where do you get your information from, typically? Where would you seek information from?
The internet.
It's a big place. Can you narrow that down?
Absolutely right. A big place. And you can't just pick on one particular one to think, I'm going to get all my news from here, and this is where I'm going to get all my information. No, you don't. People nowadays, I'm afraid, seem to get all their information from that broad spectrum on the internet.
Thanks, Jazz, for your call, Jazz in Uxbridge. I hope Ben Bradshaw is right, the Labour MP we spoke to earlier on, that we will get as near as damn it to full transparency on exactly what the degree to which there's Russian interference in these troll factories, in our institutions, in our elections. Even. But who holds the power in this? It feels, I'm not saying this from a position of authority, but it feels like Russia are ahead of us on this. Do you feel that as well? Who should be afraid here after Theresa May's accusations last night in that speech? Will Putin be breaking a sweat on them? I don't get the impression that he will. How afraid of us, of the West, is Russia? 0345 6060 973, the number to call. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. A couple of callers very relaxed about what Putin is doing in the world, whether it's cyber espionage in our elections or whether it's his activities in Crimea, in Ukraine. I wouldn't be so quick to be relaxed about Vladimir Putin myself. John in Glasgow, how do you see it?
Oh, I don't believe Theresa, to be honest. I think if she's going to tell us that, I want to see the evidence.
Well, you don't believe it's happening?
No. I believe every country's at it. That does it. Every country does it. And my questions would be where was our spy agencies when this was happening then, if it happened? Where's the evidence? Because they told us Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, they could send there in 45 minutes. Well, now how many years later and we've still not got them?
Well, it's interesting. All right. You're right. I mean, you know, we need evidence. That's why we need the transparency of Parliament. It's why we need good journalism to investigate these things as well.
I would say the government now release the evidence and who gave them the evidence that Saddam Hussein had the weapons of mass destruction, and release the evidence to show us if Russia did it or not. Because it's going down a very bad road here. I can see it. You've got the European Union army, you've got this one, that one, and they're all blaming Russia. You keep poking this Russian bear, he's going to end up reacting.
But do you accept, I mean, there is some evidence. Do you accept, for example, when an organisation like the Oxford Internet Institute tells journalists that at least 54 accounts of the well over 2,000 accounts linked by Twitter to that factory in St. Petersburg I talked about, that state-backed troll factory in St. Petersburg, 54 accounts were linked to that place. So that's significant, isn't it? It's good to know.
The same about us. Putin actually said the same about us interfering in his election as well. It swings and roundabouts. It swings both ways.
There's equivalence as far as you're concerned.
What I would do is shatter the GCHQ into a million pieces. If Russia interfered with our elections and the American elections, well, the CIA and the GCHQ aren't doing their job correctly, are they?
John, thanks for your call. John in Glasgow. Andy in Holyhead says, you'd have to be really stupid to believe what you see on social media. Most people already know most of this stuff, particularly political stuff, is utter rubbish. Depends who you follow, Andy. I think with Twitter, I don't use Facebook, but with Twitter, I mean, it's entirely dependent on who you follow, whether that's journalists or people who are in a particular situation and have expertise in that situation. If you know that they are rigorous people, then you're good to go. It's entirely about who you follow. It's like newspapers. It's entirely about what you read and what you know about who's doing the writing. Lee says, how convenient this comes out now. Now May can turn around to the public and blame Brexit on Putin, and that they're going to shelve Brexit now. Oh, Lee, don't tease me. Andy's called and a fan from Norbury to carry on our conversation about just how deep the interference in our affairs Russia's cyber games are. Andy, hello.
Yeah, hi, how you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. Yeah, what did you want to say?
Yeah, where's the evidence? Evidence, facts, evidence. I see no evidence. All I hear is Russia. They ain't coming. Where's the evidence?
What do you mean they ain't coming? We don't think they're coming, do we?
No, but, you know, everything's all Russia. It's, where's the evidence that they're... I want to see some evidence and facts, as your last caller just said. I don't see anything. I just don't see anything. And because Theresa May said something...
Do you mean...
Said there was weapons of destruction?
Yeah. Do you mean specifically on cyberspace interference?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Because there's evidence in Crimea, isn't there? There's evidence of what they did in Crimea. There's evidence of what they've been doing in Ukraine. That's hard evidence.
Yeah. I really don't. I think what we need to do deep dives, because Ukraine was an elected government. It was a coup d'etat, removed on a coup d'etat, just because of the guy at the time said, "Now, you know what? We don't want to join the EU." That was a coup d'etat, plain and simple. You know, we need to get deep dive into all this stuff that we're talking about, because it's very, very dangerous for our future children and their grandchildren, that we're just putting out these kind of memes of ideas about what things are. We need the deep dive, we need the facts, we need the evidence, get everything out in the open. Let's have real considered debate with constructive reasoning and thinking about what we're talking about. I know it's very difficult in a sort of Twitter-style sort of phone-in show like this where you've only got a minute or so. But come on, this is just ludicrous, absolute ludicrous. I want to see the evidence and the facts of all this stuff.
So if they're making it, you clearly think the government is making this up. Why are they? Why?
Without a shadow of a doubt. This has been going on for generations, decades, generations this has been going on.
But why in this instance? Why this and why now?
Well, why now? Well, actually, because it's a guy called Donald Trump. They're trying to link with a guy called Putin and maybe somebody in Korea. And because we don't like them, because we're not winning anymore, because we don't want to win, how can we propagate this Cold War into a hot war? I know what. Anything that we can do, let's attack it with Russia.
What are you talking about?
It's nonsense.
Well, you're just spewing words at me, Andy. What are you talking about?
I'm talking about the fact that there just seems to be this constant thread about Russia. And I'm thinking, I've had enough of this. Where is the evidence? You mentioned Comey before. Okay, well, Comey, he played both sides, and the testimony against Clinton's emails, he played both sides. Even the DNC and the Republicans distanced themselves from him. This is all stuff trying to put...
what do you mean he played both sides? His job isn't to serve either side. His job is to serve America when he was head of the FBI.
Yeah, okay, if you believe that. I mean, lots of false documents there on that the FBI website. It's nonsense. It's all nonsense as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
I want to see some evidence about any of this stuff that links anybody
well,
to
Russia. Be sure to ring again, Andy, when the Electoral Commission has reported back after its investigations and after the Culture Select Committee in the Commons has got its evidence from Twitter and from Facebook and the various other lines of inquiry going on. Let's talk about it again then. Thank you for your call. Andy in Nottingham remains to be convinced that Vladimir Putin is a threat to anything. Matt in Chelmsford, hello.
Hi, Sheila.
How do you see this? Do you think that the Russians are afraid of us now?
Not at all. I think Russians are playing a weak hand really well. I think they've got a long history of this all through the Cold War. But back then, it was them forging documents on written paper, and now with the age of information age, they can do it on a grand scale. They did it successfully in the Georgian War, where they shut down their banks. Precursor to the invasion, they said, look what we can do. Like we've spoken about, they've done it in Ukraine and across the West. I don't think Russia are strong. I think they have poor demographics. They rely on oil and gas. They're a corrupt country. I think we need a more engaged civic. We need reporters and journalists to inform the public better, which is hard because people believe it was rubbish. I think that I don't think that he's scared. I don't think we should be scared either. I think we play into their hands when we big up what they're doing and we inflate it too much. I think that...
But don't we, on things, for example, the photograph that's been used a lot today is the photograph of the woman in the hijab on Westminster Bridge after the terror attack, and how that was used, it turns out, by a Russian troll factory, spewing out Twitter postings and the like.
It happens in America, not to change subject, but the Black Lives Matter and all that stuff, they actually set up, Russian trolls set up right-wing groups on Facebook, and they organised a rally where thousands of people showed up and the organisers didn't show up because the organisers were in Russia. So I think it's just...
But that's worrying, isn't it, Matt? That is worrying.
Of course it's worrying. Of course it's worrying, yeah.
So how do we guard against it? That, you know, those citizens who don't want... Well, I presume I include you in this list of people who don't want to be in combat with their fellow man and woman in the country that they live in, who don't want to see a brown face and decide it's the enemy, who don't want to see a Muslim woman and decide she's the enemy. How do we tackle, as citizens, someone trying to divide us?
That's a tough one. I think,
but we need to ask ourselves, don't we? If we're online every day and there are thousands of foreign trolls whose sole aim is to change how we think, then we need to ask ourselves those questions. We need to ask ourselves what we're looking at online.
Yeah, we do. And I think that people always go to, we need to ask the internet companies to help. I don't think they do enough, but that's a bit of a cliched cop-out argument because there's only so much they can do. People are going to believe stuff. You can't block. If you go too far, like in Germany, I think they're bringing in fines. Companies that don't pull down certain imagery and certain websites, they're giving massive fines of like 500 grand. So I think that goes too far. You've got to find a balance. But
it was interesting to see. It was interesting to see that Twitter has handed nearly 3,000 accounts, a list of accounts, to the US Intelligence Committee, all of which Twitter had suspended because they were linked to Russia, these accounts. And we've got our own MPs wanting to see examples from within those accounts of posts about British politics. So nearly 3,000 individual Twitter feeds. The scale of content, information, misinformation they could pump out is huge.
Because it's just information and it's just language. It's very hard to police. The I've studied this at King's. We did a strategic communications module in cybersecurity, and the way the Russians have viewed information warfare is different to us. They see it as a continuation. They see it as sort of on a chart. They see it going along the whole way, even when there is escalation to more physical violence. They see this as a continuation, and it's part and parcel of their overall strategy in dealing with foes.
But do you think that we, because it seems vital to me that we understand what we are looking at and that we guard ourselves against the kind of nonsense that's spewed out there on the internet. And I can hear it myself in some of the conversations I have on this programme, not this one, Matt, but where people have just decided that this is the worldview and that's what's happening and they're all out to get us, and, you know, that they believe anything they read on Facebook, and there's no sort of judgment process happening.
Yeah, I think that goes down to education and being taught more about it in schools and in the media, but it needs to be, I think it's a loud minority. I think most people don't think this way. I think most people want to trust the media and they want to trust institutions, but when they see them lie on domestic and not lie, but
sometimes lie,
sometimes lie and misrepresent and frame economic and social issues.
Then we damage ourselves. We don't need Putin to do it for us.
And we stay within the mainstream framework and don't talk about radical ideas that can change our economy. Then when we talk about foreign policy issues, which the public are least informed about by their very nature, then they'll believe what's the phrase? A lie can go around the world before
the truth has got its shoes on, socks on, shoes on. Yeah.
I think that when things are exciting and they're about Russia and they're about all these conspiratorial things, people love a rumour and they're easy to believe. And they put a lot of money in RT. They put a lot of money into these productions. And we do the same. Well, we actually stopped it in the end of Cold War. We had our information bureaus and we had our America had their big public diplomacy department and stuff, but because of their their commitment to the First Amendment, they didn't want to carry that on. But I think we need to up that again and have the Radio Free America that used to be pumped around Eastern Europe and stuff. I think we need to revive some of that stuff.
To make a difference. No, I think you're right. We have to be proactive against it, don't we? Not just defensive. Thank you, Matt. Matt in Chelmsford. Lots of texts coming in on this as well. I'll read some of them out in just a moment and take more of your calls. It's 1:46. Let me give you an example of how this stuff works, this fakery online that we know in some instances has been directed from a troll factory, so-called, in St. Petersburg in Russia. And Damien, I mentioned a moment ago, Damien Collins, the chair of the Commons Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee, who will be questioning Twitter and Facebook about some of these accounts in the next few weeks. Twitter handed over almost 3,000 accounts that they had deleted because they were linked to Russia. And one of them was called @SouthLoneStar. And it posted that picture that you're probably familiar with of the young Muslim woman in a winter coat and a headscarf walking across Westminster Bridge at the time in the immediate aftermath of the terror attack. And it presented the picture of this woman as being a Muslim woman who didn't care what had happened to people on the bridge. It was no such thing. It was a woman who happened to be on the bridge, happened to be on the phone, probably saying to somebody, oh my God, I'm in the middle of a terror attack, or can you get help, or I'm fine, or whatever you do in those situations if you're not injured. And the people around her had medics and paramedics from the nearby St. Thomas's Hospital. So professionals were helping those people already. She was presented as a Muslim who didn't care, a Muslim who probably celebrated that terrorist attack. And she herself has said, now that she knows exactly what happened with her image, not only have I been devastated by witnessing that terror attack, I've also had to deal with the shock of finding my picture plastered all over social media by those who could not look beyond my attire, who then drew conclusions based on hate and xenophobia. And there were hashtags attached to this picture, things like ban Islam. And during the Brexit campaign, or after the EU referendum, the same account, now shut down by Twitter, was tweeting things like, I hope UK after Brexit vote will start to clean their land from Muslim invasion. UK voted to leave future European caliphate, hashtag Brexit vote. So that's an example of how it works. And, you know, fakery isn't new, but the use of social media and the sheer spread of information you can get really easily on social media is what's making this such an appealing part of the new Cold War, whatever you want to call it, the new cyber war. John in Edinburgh, do you think we are still in the process of getting a handle on this, both as citizens and as a nation and as a government?
No, I don't think so. I think that what has been said today and in the programme today is a very sad snapshot of what Britain is. I mean, it is the main feeding things for Britain seem to be feed insecurity and feed this very backward-looking society that always looks back generally to war. Okay, and so when we have somebody like Theresa May saying jump, we say how high.
But hang on, John. What if, the information will emerge? There will be the evidence that everybody's clamouring for ultimately. Do you completely reject the idea that we have security that we must protect?
No, I don't think that we have. I don't reject that idea. I'm sure that there is security we must protect, but unlike other nations, we seem to have. It seems to be at the forefront of our mind that the government keeps on feeding this insecurity. I mean, if billions of pounds and millions of pounds or whatever has been spent on MI5 and MI6 and security, just let them get on with the job. We don't need to be reminded. I mean, it's almost as if the politician is saying to us, I'm going to give you a problem, and only I have the answer.
But it sounds to me like you want almost like Stepford politicians, where they just say, it's marvellous, isn't it? It's great to be in Britain. Everything's fine and lovely. Don't worry about the detail. The MI5 are taking care of it. It's fine. I don't think we live in a negative country, do we? We live in a realistic country.
No, I think we live in a pretty negative country. I mean, it's fairly backward-looking. There's hardly a day passes by that there isn't some talk of what the army is remembering on a daily basis. This is fed to us daily. Okay, here's
that's because people died for the freedoms that you and I are enjoying, John.
But here's an idea for you, okay? Sweden is right beside Russia. Okay? It is everything to fear that we would perceive to fear, but we're not so close to Russia. And they're right beside Russia. They make political choices, and that politics is about choices, I understand. And they spend more on childcare than they spend on defense. Now, we choose through feeding this insecurity all the time and feeding this very backward, militaristic almost thing, we spend 7 times more on defence than we spend on childcare. I mean, it's almost as if I'm saying I'm going to spend 7 times more per head of population than Sweden does, even though they have the Russians next door. But I'm going to make it okay and make you understand by feeding your insecurity all the time. I mean, it's a ridiculous situation.
All right, thanks for your call, John. John in Edinburgh. Julian in Fulham. Hello.
Oh, hi, Sheila. I was just thinking that, I think you asked, where do you get your information from? And
I think it matters, don't you, these days? Well, it always did, I suppose. Yeah.
I don't know. If you read the newspapers, The Guardian, The Telegraph, any of these places, and then go on the internet and all that nonsense, you get to trust and know who, your sources are, and who the veracity of what they're saying, is it of any value? And so, over a period of years, what you have a semblance of the truth, on certain topics. And when it comes to, Theresa May saying, oh, the Russians are doing it, it seems to me like that's just a sort of a great way of abnegating responsibility or something else,
But are you concerned at all that an election that you took part in might have been influenced? Well, hang on, let me finish my question, Julian. Are you concerned at all that an election you took part in might have been swayed, not by your vote, my vote, everybody else's vote, but by some insidious activity taking place in a troll factory in St. Petersburg? Just think on that for a second. That's pretty dispiriting, isn't it?
That's probably what is happening. And the fact is that most people aren't voting. That's the issue that no one wants to take hold of. You talk about Brexit, this massive big thing that's going on. Only 45% of the population even bother to get out of bed to vote for it. And then 25% of that lot, are getting. So I'm just saying, no one's actually voting. If you can actually galvanise people to vote, we might get a more true, opinion on what's really going on in the country.
Okay, thanks very much, Julian, for call. Julian in Fulham. Dean in Basildon. Hello.
Hi, Sheila.
You don't believe Russia is a threat at all?
No, absolute nonsense. Sheila, I have a business. I work for some of the richest people for the products that what we make. in the world. And I see Russians working with Poles, Lithuanians, Danes, Greeks, Spaniards. People aren't the problem. People get on with each other fine. Governments are the problem, because all our governments are manipulated from high finance, business, you know, the big central and federal banks, which should be made illegal. You know, these huge enterprises can fund both sides of wars and get away with it. You know,
so thank goodness for general elections and our power to kick them out. And oh no, what if they're infested with Russian trolls? Oh dear, then we're really lost, aren't we?
I see there's one angle from you know, radio stations should be unbiased. And I love this radio station, but
listen, Dean, it drives me crazy when people say you're biased just because you're making a point. The point I'm making is the one we've been discussing for an hour, which is that our Prime Minister has said this stuff about Russia. We're discussing it. And I just said to you, what if? What if? And that's bias. It's a question, Dean. It's a question.
What if?
Yeah, what if what if yours and my remaining power to get rid of these awful governments that you're talking about is infested by Russian trolling? What if? Wouldn't that be a dark day?
They're likely to be infested by various groups, not just Russia. You know, we got caught out in Northern Ireland, we got caught out in Iraq, SAS, killing Sunnis, to incite violence between groups. It's called divide and conquer, Sheila. We've done it for hundreds of years, all over the world.
Dean, thank you for your call. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Dean, in Basildon.